Friends, I invite you today into a time of reflection that I'm offering you. Some of you will be aware, and perhaps the couple of medals here are a little bit of a giveaway. I served as a chaplain in the Australian Army for the last 10 years, retired just in January this year. So let me offer you these reflections for ANZAC Day, and I do this offering a personal take on all of this from my own experiences. Of course, ANZAC Day being probably the high point in ceremonial and ritual life for certainly for the Australian Defence Force, and to a lesser degree, of course, but importantly for the Army as well. When we think of ANZAC Day, we think particularly of these key themes: courage, initiative, teamwork, respect, and sacrifice. Sacrifice, I guess, is that key one that comes to mind for us when we recall so many of our countrymen and women who gave their lives in service for the cause of peace and freedom, for liberty, for our land, and for, back then, for the Commonwealth. Here, in this strange time of isolation, of course, ANZAC Day ceremonies have been shut up all around the country, and it's, for many veterans, for diggers across this land, that's a really hard time, because it's the one time of the year when they so love to get together and reminisce and catch up with their mates and have those special times of remembering, bonding once again. And this year, of course, there's none of that possible. There's been a movement for driveway ceremonies or stand twos for ANZAC Day, and yesterday morning in the early dawn at 6 a.m. in my driveway, with a live bugler, I have to say, we commemorated ANZAC Day in a very brief ceremony. The ode, some prayer, some reflective reading, and a space to light a candle like this with a homemade version of a milk bottle carton and the poppies in the dark of the morning, of course, giving off a beautiful image. The most significant experiences for me of ANZAC Day marching were here in Melbourne, in the rain, drenched to our skin, and standing tall and proud as people lined the streets with their umbrellas, and they also got considerably damp and wet, and these poppies were there. It was the centenary year of ANZAC, and some wonderful images were there for us, and it spurred us on like you could not believe. There was a wonderful sense of pride as we were acknowledged walking through the city, across the bridge, and on our way down to the Shrine of Remembrance. One of my highlights as a chaplain in deployment was in 2013 in the Solomon Islands, where I was away with our peacekeepers, 180 officers and men and women who were away for 4 months in the Solomons at the end of 10 years of mission, a peacekeeping endeavour, hugely successful, I'm glad to say. And I had the privilege of conducting worship every Sunday in probably the most picturesque chapel I'm ever likely to work in the Solomons, looking out over palm tree-clad golden beaches. And the image here takes me back like as though it was yesterday. Let me just unpack the role of a chaplain as I reflect on that time, and it really came together for me with all the training beforehand to help me understand, of course, the key responsibility is about pastoral care. It's about looking after our soldiers and their extended family when we're back home here. But on deployment, of course, there was me and the nurse as the two key human agents in that deployment, looking after the well-being of our soldiers. Caring for, in my case, for their spiritual well-being, and making sure they could maintain good connections with family, and addressing all the concerns that come up in that space. Providing religious ministry, of course, and I was delighted to celebrate Holy Communion, the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper on a weekly basis, and people came and shared in that time, offered character development training, which is part of the brief of the chaplain, and provide advice to command. Subject matter experts were regarded as in the space of ethical and moral guidance for command, and so that's always a critical and important point to offer that wisdom. I want to make clear that I'm nothing special. I'm an ordinary bloke. I happen to be a Uniting Church minister of 40 years, and I'm a dad and a grandfather, a husband, and a dad to 3 adult daughters and now 9 littlies, grandchildren. This picture is a proud moment with a couple of the grandchildren when we gathered together on Remembrance Day. The hint of sacrifice, well, not a lot more than a hint really, when I spoke earlier amongst the traits that we look for in Australian service women and service men. Sacrifice comes front and centre to that work. And on deployment overseas, in a tragic time, on the 22nd of June 2013, we lost one of our best. Corporal Cameron Bairdy, as he was known, was killed in action in Afghanistan, and because we were away at that time on deployment, I got the huge privilege and honour of conducting the memorial service for Cameron Baird. I've since gotten to know his dad a little bit and met with his family and shared in some special times. He was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, of course, the highest decoration that can be afforded in the Commonwealth. And Cameron Baird is a fine soldier and a wonderful human being who led his men in battle and ultimately paid the price. That story tells us such a lot about the resilience that is part of what it means to be an Australian soldier, because his buddies, his colleagues had to go straight back into battle in the face of the loss of their leader. His section continued to fight the battle and to defeat insurgents in a very messy engagement in the fields of Afghanistan. That story and so many others like it are recalled and remembered when we come again to the ANZAC Day reflection. And of course it links with the Gospel reading that we've heard today of that reminder that greater love hath no person than to lay down their life. And that, of course, was Jesus' mandate to offer his life, and in solidarity with the sacrifice of human beings down through the years, and to give his life that we might have life. The chapel at Honiara was filled to capacity, and this image reminds us of that wonderful scene when we gathered to mark and honour our memory of Corporal Cameron Baird, VC, MG. In my own way, I wanted to honour the memory of Bairdy and also my uncle, Bill Simpson, who fought in the Second World War in Papua New Guinea. He didn't die, he came home, but he was a broken man and was never the same as a husband and a father to his 3 daughters, my cousins. So last year I took on the challenge to walk the Kokoda Trek, and this image is getting to the end of that trek. I was pretty well buggered. You can imagine, for an old bloke at 65 then, taking on the challenge that young blokes did, it was hard work, physically demanding. To my amazement, I did it with a friend, Jono, and a bunch of other younger guys, but Jono was a Vietnam veteran in this image, and he got through. Of course, we weren't dodging bullets, and we had food provided by our porters and our cooks and our guides. We weren't needing to be concerned about the enemy, but it was a huge sense of accomplishment for me personally, and a wonderful identification with that story of sacrifice. I think probably the Kokoda Trek engagement is maybe the less well known, but equally needs to be up there, where Australia was physically threatened by an invading force of 10,000 Japanese coming from the northern beaches of Papua New Guinea. And of course we know Darwin was hugely impacted during those years. 1942 saw Australian reservist soldiers push back that Japanese force, hugely outnumbered, and take the Kokoda Trek, and indeed push our enemy all the way back to the northern beaches. You might want to take a moment to read this powerful recollection of the Kokoda story. As part of that arduous trek, we went to the Bamana War Cemetery, and in that space I found Chaplain Cox, his grave, and I paid my respects in that space, knowing that before me chaplains have given their life in service with the men they worked alongside of in the First World War, in the Second World War, in Vietnam. And that for me is a very powerful moment, to know that my colleagues have paid that ultimate price as they continued to serve. Positioned to serve is the hashtag identity we like to use today as Defence chaplains. In my normal work as a chaplain, I had the privilege, often at Puckapunyal, the large army base in the centre of Victoria, near Seymour, to put on the war paint and to work alongside our soldiers. That's what we do. That's that incarnational ministry, to identify fully with the joys and the struggles that soldiers engage with. And in that space, we bring the hint of the sacred, the reminder of the God who is present and always there to love and nurture and challenge and guide and encourage. And that's part of my privilege, to bring the bread and wine into that space. Sometimes the soldiers will see us coming and say, "Padre, did you bring the wine and crackers? Are we going to have communion?" And not all of them, not even lots of them, but surprisingly, a good number of them want to take that quiet moment among the busyness of their training routines to remember the sacred and to be still. And that's been, for me, a wonderful privilege and honour in the 10 plus years of my time serving in uniform. Pastoral conversations, celebrations of marriages have been a joy, and baptisms, and of course funerals, all part and parcel of the work that I've been privileged to do. I talked earlier about delivering character training, and respect is the most recent character trait that the Defence Force has sought to add to the package of courage, initiative and teamwork. And so in my work last year with Army Cadets, I was privileged to remind them about respect as being a key component in the way we do our living in uniform, respecting the other, looking out for those who might be doing it tough, caring for those who might be on the edge, a bit marginalised. What wonderful gospel values for us to attest to and to remind young people in uniform that this is critical to our identity as we shape and develop the best of character in what we regard in the Australian Army Cadet Corps as Australia's preeminent youth development organisation. It's certainly been a wonderful journey for me, training up and developing new chaplaincy capability. Sometimes we work in the community with returned veterans who look for ways to honour the memory of the past, and this image is not far from here at Queen's Park in Essendon, Moonee Ponds, where I had the honour on Remembrance Day in 2018 to dedicate a digger's seat to the memory of those from Essendon Rifles in the First World War. A few more images here of happy reminders, time with Army cadets and their staff at Puckapunyal. We have 3,500 cadets in Victoria, and they have lots of volunteer leaders who do some superb work alongside and supported by a very small core of Army staff, mostly like me, reservists who put in huge amounts of time to shape and guide those young lives. This is the image of the new chaplains I recruited, 3 of the 4, and a happy moment when they were presented with their crosses to be added to their uniform, the collar on their shirts. And this is Steve Terrell, chaplain of the 31 Battalion across Victoria. And I put this slide in because I want to affirm how important it is for all Defence members to be supported by their family. ANZAC Day is usually that wonderful opportunity for us to know that when we do what we do in uniform, we can only do that with the support of loved ones around us who pay the sacrifice as well to do time without us, especially when soldiers are deployed and away overseas for 4 or 6 or 9 months at a time. It's a big price that they pay, and sometimes that price hits home hard with family relationships that fracture or struggle, and chaplains, of course, are key to the business of trying to help to heal and hold that together, or look for ways to go forward when that's not possible. Chaplaincy on the job at Puckapunyal with Army cadets has been hugely satisfying and rewarding, and I was glad to sign off in January, leaving that space in good shape, knowing that my colleague posted into that role, the Anglican Canon Robert Vun, who works at St Paul's Cathedral in the city as the Canon Missioner in the team at St Paul's, puts his uniform on as a reservist and continues the work that I've been doing in that space. I mentioned sometimes that soldiers struggle, and of course similarly across our wider community we need to be attentive to the business of mental health and mental well-being. And sometimes in army life, soldiers who have struggled, impacted by what we sometimes refer to as moral injury, a subset of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that can take people to sometimes a very dark place. And I've trained and been privileged to train others in the business of suicide intervention in that space, when people are particularly fragile and vulnerable. And we use this training platform, ASSIST, the Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, a 2-day intensive to help to skill ordinary people in the business of being able to identify and recognise the signs where people are perhaps going downhill in that space and feeling particularly fragile or vulnerable with suicide ideation, thoughts of killing themselves. And we need to look for ways to intervene, to save lives, to help people to reset in that space. And so it's been again a privilege and an honour for me to train others and equip people in the business of saving lives. We know that after every course, within a fortnight, at least one person out of that course of usually a dozen or up to 18 or 20 people will have a live suicide intervention. It's a bit scary to think of those numbers, but we know that that can help to save lives and help people to get the appropriate clinical support, to get issues sifted and sorted and get life back on track again. Life is too precious and valuable to simply let it be extinguished in that way. And so it's important for us, and of course a key conviction in our Christian ministry, that we want to be engaged in the business of saving lives and helping lives to be more whole and complete and full. So we don't let people live under a dark cloud, and we don't let our mates fight alone. We're there alongside them. And this field of poppies reminds us of how important that is as we share in the business of reclaiming the memory of that sacrifice, not to glorify war, not for a moment to bang the drum and to somehow crank up the agenda for warmongering. For goodness sake, that's the last thing on our mind. But when people are called by our government into places of danger, where sometimes they pay the ultimate price, chaplains need to be there to provide care and support, nurture and encouragement, and ultimately to try and lead people into a place where we can all become peacemakers. Let me lead you in a prayer for peace as part of this reflection. In this troubled world, we pray for peace. Sovereign Lord, prosper the work of those who preserve human rights, promote the pursuit of those who work for reconciliation and justice. Direct us into the ways of understanding, reconciling with respect. We remember those who in times past travelled far away from home to face those who would oppress. In their example, we see the presence of Jesus Christ. May we learn to break down fear and ignorance and build up peace and justice and freedom. We eagerly pray for peace. In the name of Jesus, the Prince of Peace. Amen. I talked about family, and I wanted to weave in a shot here of my wife Jan and honour and respect her contribution to the time of my service, as I was previously posted as the lead chaplain or the coordinating chaplain for the 4th Brigade, covering all 4 of Army Reserve work in Victoria, and heading up a fine team of Defence chaplains who I was privileged to work and coordinate their work. And now the ode. Can I invite you, if you will, to place your hand on your heart and share this poignant moment with me as we remember the ode. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget. Say it with me, lest we forget. Amen. So friends, thank you for journeying with me through this ANZAC reflection. I encourage you all to, in this strange time of isolation, to look for ways to laugh and reach out, connect with friends and loved ones and family, and work the phone and laugh often as best you can. I do thank you for your interest and prayers for our Defence chaplains, and I covet your prayer for those who even now are deployed on operations overseas, some whom I know who are wearing the uniform and working for peace and well-being across our land, across our world. Amen. Thanks be to God.